premises. But not, so there are many other things listed here, such as, I'll just go through them. The office spaces, conference training rooms, gross supply warehouse, storage space, commercial kitchens, concentrate kitchens, warehouse storage space, and then the laboratory you touched on a little bit, but is there anything else you can tell us to fill us in on all those other uses that are listed here?
Sure. All of these are businesses, they will need office space in addition to grow space, particularly given the stringent record-keeping requirements. So the office space is not for other tenants, but it's for the use of the tenants who operate the greenhouses and other facilities. There's 15,000 square feet of preparation space, which is baking products with cannabis, making extracts and stuff like that. The agricultural provider will not be providing anything that's related to marijuana itself. It will not need to be licensed as a marijuana supplier. It'll be supplying drip tubes and stuff like that, fertilizer for use by growers. What else? There's going to be classroom space because each person to become licensed to work in these facilities needs to undergo specified training as set forth in the regulations of the commission. Anything I missed?
Yeah, well, so the commercial kitchens and the concentrate.
Yes.
What is going to be made? What are the processes taking place? There's a lot that could be described there.
Sure, and the regulations specify what's allowed. Concentrates are made from the cannabis itself, whole different varieties. Products are infused with the concentrate, and lots of people like to purchase baked goods that contain marijuana. And we've provided Mr. Pollard with a brief demonstrating that so long as the product is grown on the premises, such processing and baking is an agricultural use under state law.
So then the gross supply warehouse, is there any manufacturing taking place or assembly or?
No, it's just product storage. Drip emitters, drip line, light bulbs for the LED lighting, containers, things like that, no manufacturing.
Okay, so it's just redistribution?
Well, I guess it's like any other agricultural supplier. They'll keep stuff in storage and sell it to the growers.
The growers that are on the premises or growers outside of the?
We're anticipating on the premises, they'll get everything there.
Okay. You also talk about lodging for visitors and residents in a future phase of the project. Are you considering that part of this application?
No, and we responded to Mr. Pollard's letter saying that that was not part of this application. And we recognize that if we want to do anything that's not specifically set forth in the plan, we'll need to come back to modify the special permit.
Okay. I'll give you a chance. Yeah, go ahead.
A few questions. Use the microphone now so they can hear you. With respect to, is this working?
Yes.
Water usage. You indicated that perhaps worst case would be 1/2 gallon per plant per day. How many plants do you anticipate?
Josh, do you have
It really depends on the individual grower. It depends on the individual grower.
It depends on how they grow.
And it depends on a lot of things having to do with how they configure their space. Thank you.
Do you have a ballpark?
You know, in a space that.
Is that one not working? Talk right into it.
Hello? No.
That's the stage.
Let's do for two.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
I'm sorry. It's probably not long enough. All right, that sounds good. So it really depends on the grower and how they configure the space. Typically, I think we're anticipating that people will want 5,000 square feet, maybe 10,000 if they're a decent size cultivator. And when you think about that, the 10,000 square foot grow, it's not actually all 10,000 square feet because there's walkways and there's pathways, so it really comes out to 7,000, 7,500.
And you need dry space too.
And then you need, and drying space as well. And then you usually split it up into a vegetative side and then a flowering side as the plants mature more. So it's a little bit hard to estimate, but it's not going to be tens of thousands of plants.
I had heard a figure of 35 square feet for a mature plant, is that right?
That sounds probably pretty close to right.
In which case, 7,000 square feet would be 200 plants, which would be 100 gallons a day, which is what the average person uses at home.
Yes, thank you for the math, but that to me sounds like the numbers that we're looking at.
And as I understood your presentation, a substantial number of gallons would be recycled.
Well, I suppose there's a little waste if people trek it out of the greenhouses and all, but everything will either go through the floor drains, the air conditioning system, or the condensation traps. So the objective is that everything that's used will be recycled over and over, with some loss due to inefficiency. So I mean, if you use 10 gallons, it's probably the 15th time that water's been used or something. It's just used over and over and over.
So the total would be, rough estimate, 100 gallons a day, some of which will be recycled, or perhaps a large portion of which would be recycled.
That's right.
Let's talk about security for a moment. How many personnel do you anticipate?
The commission regulations are vague. It's certainly going to be 24/7, so that leaves you with a fair number of people to cover all the shifts. It will likely be 2 people on duty at any one time because the regulations require that in most situations. So enough people to cover 24/7 times 2.
But 2 at a time?
Yes.
Will they be armed?
It's funny, the regulations say that drivers cannot be. They haven't spoken about the security guards yet, but we don't see any need for having them armed at this point. I mean, there'll be immediate response, probably 99% of which will be for wildlife coming up on the cameras.
If there were an intruder,
Yes.
how would the system work? Would the town police be called?
The regulations require a panic alarm, as in a bank, that sounds or alerts not only in the police station, but also at a private security firm under contract. So the 2 people on duty would respond, and the call would be made to both the local police and the security firms that's been hired.
So there could be some involvement of our town's
That's
police force.
And that's part of why we pay the impact fee.
On the plus side, you said that there would be real estate taxes. Do you have any idea of the value of the property at full build?
At this build, full build, conservatively $8 to $9 million.
So that would be conservatively between $85,000 and $90,000 a year of income to the town.
And then you have the personal property taxes.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
With respect to the personal property tax, in situations where there are solar fields, very often there's a long-term agreement entered into between the town,
The pilot.
exactly, and the company that's producing the energy. And that's so that the town has an idea of what kind of income over a long period of time it will generate, and also there's some certainty on behalf of the company, the energy company, as to what their expense would be. Would you be, or would your client be amenable to discussing that type of agreement with the town?
I'm not sure the statute allows it, but certainly in terms of the impact fees, which are for 3 years and renewable, we're
Well,
interested.
that's a different one.
Yes.
But if the statute doesn't allow it, we just won't tell anybody.
Yeah, I just don't know. That's something I haven't looked at.
With respect to the impact fees, I understand that this is a cash business.
Correct.
That is for various reasons. How would, let's assume it was 3% of gross sales with Mr. and Mrs. X who owned the greenhouse. How would the town monitor? How would the town know what the amount of those sales were?
That's a question we're wrestling with. Certainly from the video surveillance, we'll know how much product is being produced, and we have to report that to the state. So there'll be some idea. You're right. Thank you, Attorney General. It's going to remain a cash business for a while. I think we'll have to look to how California and Oregon have dealt with that.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea, but I would assume that your client would have the same problem if unless it's a fixed rental. But if as part of the rental it's going to be some sort of percentage of production or percentage of sales, you'd have the same interest as the town.
That's right.
One of the buildings. Am I hogging there?
No, go.
I usually do. I apologize.
Okay. I have.
I have more.
I have more too.
Go
We
ahead.
can take turns.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Michelle wants to
No,
speak.
go ahead. I
You
only
sure?
have one that I
Let's
just
do
want
it, Fred.
clarification, so.
Classes. One of the buildings is designated as a classroom. What sort of classes and who would be attending?
Well, the regulations require each employee to undergo a fair amount of training before being licensed. That's the sort of classes we're anticipating, certainly at the beginning. We may consider classes in teaching people how to do this stuff, but that's...
When you say do this stuff, grow it or use
grow
it?
it, concentrate it, process it. I think there's plenty of sources for learning how to use it.
Manufactured, though, you're not
Yes.
talking, okay. All right. And the parking places.
Yes.
How many parking places are anticipated?
Well, we followed the town bylaw, which specifies 70 parking spaces, and there are 70. We think that's excessive, but, you know, there's plenty of land there, so if you want 70, we'll do 70.
And how, total personnel during an average day, what would you anticipate?
I'm not sure how many administrative personnel each grower will require, but the cultivation with all the hand trimming and everything else is fairly labor intensive. So I'd estimate 5 workers per 10,000 square feet of grow space. So that would be 20 during the average workday, plus 2 to 3 people in the laboratory, plus whatever administrators are present.
So you might have 30 or more people on the campus at any one particular time.
That's right.
The road leading up to the campus would be a private road and the responsibility of the owner of the property to maintain, plow, to keep in repair.
That's right, and there's a security gate at the bottom to prevent unauthorized entry. Security gate's right next to the security building.
Okay. So, as I understand it, vehicles that coming up that road, other than vehicles of employees and administrators, would be vehicles of people who are purchasing the product that is being grown.
Well,
Distributors, so to speak.
right, no retail sales,
Right,
but
I
there
understand.
will be purchases of the baked goods, the finished cannabis, and all of that. Anyone who wants to get in must stop according to the regulations, and be vetted in the security shack before being allowed to enter.
And that shack will be at the bottom of the hill?
Right, it's at the fence. I showed it to you. It's in a sort of cleared area, maybe 100 feet up from the roadway.
Okay, and those vehicles coming to pick up the product would be carrying cash, correct? Because they'd have to pay for the product,
I suppose so, yeah.
and then they'd come down the hill with product.
And the regulations are very specific that requires 2 operators in the car, no signage, product has to be out of sight, has to be a tamper-proof GPS signal, must be shortwave or other uninterruptible communications with a base station, and completely unmarked. So.
One last question, then I'll turn it over to Tara. The kitchen,
Yes.
or kitchens, will be one kitchen?
It depends on what the tenants want. I think you'll probably have a kitchen for baked goods and a separate space for concentrates.
Concentrate would be chemicals?
I don't do this stuff, so
Okay.
I don't know, but
I don't either, just for the
Yeah.
record, I don't either, on either end.
1968 was the last time. Concentrates are from the marijuana.
Concentrate is not chemicals, is that what
It
you're
doesn't mean that there has to be chemicals. There are concentrates that are produced with chemicals. We're not going to be allowing that. There's things like rosin presses, which are completely innocuous, don't have any chemicals. Oh, thank you.
It's like squeezing oranges to get orange juice.
Thank you. Yes. So the concentrates are typically extracted from the plant, and that is what the producers use to make brownies or nachos or whatever it is that they're going to make.
Are there any chemicals that,
But there will be nutrients,
and
fertilizer of various sorts.
So
All of
there's
it-
a couple of different processes that will allow. One is rosin press, which does not involve any chemicals. The other one is going to be a CO2 based process, which CO2 is not really noxious, non-noxious chemical.
That mic is not working.
No, it works,
Sorry.
you just have to speak into it.
okay,
And you're talking about concentrates. I believe you were talking about the whole Megillah.
yeah, I hear what you're saying. I want to be sure, if it's the case, that there is no adverse flow of chemicals from the campus, both into the campus property and elsewhere.
Understood. As far as the grow space, all chemicals or all nutrients are dissolved in the water that's used to water the plants. It's carefully controlled by the degree of electric current it transmits. The plants consume a great deal of that. The rest of it is in the wastewater that goes to the reverse osmosis and is extracted. And we haven't decided whether we need to have somebody cart off the wastewater from the RO process yet, but those are the only chemicals we're talking about.
One final question for me. Will anybody on the campus be permitted to utilize the product while on the campus?
It's against the regulations.
No?
You reminded me of two things. You said solar. We're negotiating with a solar company to buy renewable energy to power this, to eliminate the environmental energy impacts.
Oh.
My fellow selectmen have hit on a lot of the questions I was going to ask, but I have to go back to the commercial kitchens and concentrates, and you were talking about baked goods and people maybe being able to retail
No, it's wholesale.
allowed in this?
A retailer could come and purchase stuff to sell in his shop, like Theory Wellness in Great Barrington or something like this. There is no retail purchase. And in fact, the only sign for this place will be a small sign saying Oasis Campus, no explanation of what it is for or what it does, because we don't want this.
Please use the microphone.
The only signage will be a small sign at the entrance saying Oasis Campus and the street number, nothing to identify what happens there, and anybody attempting to approach will meet the security gate, because we don't want visitors. This is not going to be a destination for anybody who's not directly involved.
I would just add, if I could. Can I just speak right in?
Speak
right into
right into.
Hello, no?
So,
There you go.
we intend to have a logistics group on the campus that will be essentially providing transportation for all of the product that's created to its destination. I don't necessarily think that'll work in all cases, but ideally that will help us reduce any potential traffic of individuals on the campus.
Hi, Jeremiah Pollard, Town Council, and I just got I want some clarification. Don't know if the board's gonna really focus on these, but these are things that I'd like to know, which is, we've had some talk about I guess, the kitchen aspect of it. Where is that going to occur, or are you anticipating it's gonna depend on the tenants? Because I think it's gonna be important to designate where is that building, that 3,000 square foot building, is that the only place it's gonna be, or is it gonna be in the greenhouses? Okay, where is it?
No, the 3,000 square foot building is the laboratory, and that has to be isolated from everything else, and nobody who works there can have any business affiliation with any cannabis grower anywhere. You'll see this building, 15,000 square foot building, that's the building for baking and processing.
So is the 15,000 square foot building gonna be where all of the tenants, whether there's 3 tenants doing 3 different greenhouses, they're all gonna do that in that other building?
No, that's for the concentrates and the bakery. The tenant who leases a 10,000 foot greenhouse must provide not only for grow space, but for drying space and processing space within that 10,000 square feet, unless he chooses to rent something in the larger building. But it's certainly anticipated, at least initially, that they'll all want to be confined to their own area because security passes and everything else, they're completely isolated from everyone else.
So this 15,000 square foot building, is that gonna be a separate tenant? Is that what you?
Well, it will be separate processors, bakers, concentrators, yes.
All right, and in terms of the processes, the rosin press, am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
The CO2 extractor, that's an extractor, right? Are they gonna do cold extraction?
So cold
You
extraction,
want to get a
it really depends on the tenant themselves. Cold extraction in today's modern cannabis world generally indicates something called live resin. Live resin is something that people want very much. It's got very high value. And so yes, that will be the cold process that will be utilized.
So you want that permit, do you want the permit to allow that?
Sure.
Yes.
All right, those are some of the things and the questions I'm asking. I think those mechanics, although they may be the devil of details, we need to know, because and how much square footage and where. Do you have the tenants now, or
No.
you don't have the tenants now? Okay.
Nobody's interested in talking until you have your permits. So.
Well, the only reason why I ask is because I saw today, and I was actually surprised to see in Williamstown that the impact fee, the hosting agreement, was negotiated before there was a special permit. And some of the conditions that were negotiated with the hosting agreement, I know are gonna make their way into the permit. So it might be, I guess, a little reverse order compared to what we usually do, but that's what they did in Williamstown. But, so whoever they have, or whether they're doing it themselves or the tenants, it looks like they're set up. Another question I had was the cistern. So that's gonna be something different than what the Concom looked at?
Yes,
Do they have it yet?
no.
Okay, so that, when are you gonna give them that plan?
We've got an engineer working on it now. We were hoping this hearing would be continued for a month, and we'll have it to both this board and Concom within 2 weeks. And one of the things it does, we do away with that drainage into the wetlands, will be entirely outside the jurisdictional area for conservation.
The blackout curtain,
Yes.
when does it come up? When does it shut off the lighting from the facilities?
It's tied to electric eyes that you set for a certain level of illumination. When sunlight drops below that illumination, they extend. When the sun comes up the next morning and it measures the increased light, they retract.
I think it's taken for granted in the presentation, but what about noise? Is there gonna be any noise from the rising of those, anything like that?
Well, there are small electric motors to do this, a lot of small electric motors. I don't anticipate any, but I hadn't considered that. And all of the fans used in this, it's like your computer. You get an 80 millimeter fan, it makes a lot of noise because it has to go fast. You get a 120 millimeter fan, it goes much more slowly to move the same air. So these are very large fans at very low RPMs.
I think those are all the questions I had.
So, and going back to tenants, I know at earlier meetings it was indicated that lessees had been lined up of interest. So when you say that there are none, does that just mean you don't have contracts with them? And is there, I guess what I'm really looking for, is there anything you could tell us about at least potential lessees and who they are, and or characterize them in some
Well,
way?
you know, this is a unique proposal in that the applicant here is not going to be cultivating cannabis. He's going to be leasing to other people. I think one of the reasons that Mr. Pollard's illustration in Williamstown is different is because it's the same person. So we have people who've expressed interests but haven't been willing to enter into actual negotiations until we have our special permit. But remember, each of these tenants must be vetted and licensed by the commission with its rigorous standards for education, for specific activities, for Corey checks, for everything else. So nobody can just come and say, I want to lease a space.
So when you said it's the same person?
Oh, I
Clarify
mean,
that?
typically, we think there's an advantage to this system because you can have a 10,000-foot grower who doesn't need to worry about security, who doesn't need to worry about provisioning electrics and water, who doesn't need to find a space and get a permit. However, the other side of that is that if it were one person who is seeking the local permit and the license, then it wouldn't really matter in which order things were done because they're all being done by the same operator. Here, we're the landlord, and each of the tenants will be an operator.
You have security.
We provide the security, we provide the maintenance, we provide the space.
You have the road as well, right?
Yes, the road.
And the water supply and the cistern, is that gonna be Oasis campus? or-
Yes, that is collective, that's ours. We're anticipating separately metering electricity and water to each user so we control how much each user is consuming.
height of the buildings?
I'm sorry, I turned the projector off. Those greenhouses I showed are 10 feet in height. The top of the arc is 10 feet. And the exhaust stack is about 4 feet above that. So height from the ground to the top will be about 14 feet.
And how about the other buildings?
One-story buildings, typical one-story buildings, probably flat roof, so 18 feet, 20 feet.
What about septic? What do you propose to do about that?
The plan shows 3 locations for septic systems. I think some of the comments we've heard are correct that, well, first of all, if we're putting in the cistern, we need another place for the cistern. I think this will end up being a public water supply, and therefore will need a 5-acre area upon which nothing else can happen. And we'll have to locate one large septic system. So I don't know how you size a greenhouse for a septic system, but whatever the health agent in the state agreed to, we will.
How long will the construction take?
Well, as tenants signed up for the greenhouses, that'll be pretty quick, because you just have to pour your slab and you can install that. So that can be done in 4 to 6 weeks per greenhouse. The buildings will wait a little longer because, well, they're more expensive, and we want to be sure that there's enough activity in terms of growing to support the other activities that are going to be in the buildings. The baking, the concentrating, the...
Do you have an estimate for the full build?
Excuse me?
Do you have an estimate for the time it'll take to do the full build?
I would say minimum of 1 year, probably more.
Probably 2 to 2.5.
I mean, I'm an optimistic person, so I think it's probably more like 2 to 3 to fulfill this particular plan.
Can any part of the campus be seen from the road, Route 57?
Well, I mean, we're talking about 49 acres here, which runs down to the road.
Correct.
Everything we're constructing, except for the security building, which may be seen from the road in winter, except for that, everything is in the pit left from the gravel extraction. And we don't anticipate that anything will be seen off the property. If it weren't for this snow, we would have done something this week to demonstrate that, and we will as soon as we can get up there.
We'll see the fences in the...
Can, Doug, please. What about the abutters? People abutting the property, are they able to see any part of the campus once it's constructed?
We say no. I mean, and we'll try and prove that before this is over. The nearest house is the Rashad House, which is 600 feet away, downslope and on the other side of the berm. Beyond that, the next house is on the roadway and is a quarter mile away. And again, downslope and on the other side of the berm.
Do you plan on having any trees or other vegetation around the security fence?
Well, the regulations say you can't have, literally, you can't have landscaping that anybody can hide behind. So that's what it says. I'm sorry. Landscaping, we're glad to put in hedgerows or whatever, but they're going to have to be a distance from the fence to satisfy that regulation.
Okay, final question from me. Who will be the owners of the property?
Oasis Campus LLC.
That's a corporate entity.
It's a
Who will be the-
Delaware LLC. We're waiting for the certificate of good standing to register to do business in Massachusetts. It's Mr. Sykes, basically, now.
Well, you say basically, will there be other individuals who will own a portion of the LLC?
The answer is yes, there will be.
Okay. Could you provide, you don't have to do it here, would you provide the board with the names of those people and permission for us to do some sort of vetting of those individuals?
I think we need that permission first, but.
Correct.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't anticipate that being a problem. There's, you know.
Well, I'd like to make sure they don't have criminal background,
Understand,
criminal
yes.
records.
No, I was saying I don't anticipate it being a problem based on needing to ask for their permission, but
Okay.
it's not, shouldn't be an issue.
So would you undertake that to
Sure.
find out if they would give permission, submit the names to our town administrator, and we'll forward them on to the police chief?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think with the permission with the provision that not be a public record.
Why not?
No, it's not.
Well, if they give it to us, but in the context of a special permit,
I don't know what.
well, I'm talking to him. Not you. Sorry. Hopefully I'll talk.
If you insist, sure, we'll make it public.
Okay, fine. I have nothing else.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, then we'll move on to everybody else.
Yeah, so you talked about controlling odor from the greenhouses. What about from the kitchens?
I hadn't considered that. I'm sure we can provide the same type of filtration, but I don't have experience to tell you what odors are generated when you bake with concentrate. I'll have to find that out.
And then you also talked about lighting from the greenhouses, but what about lighting on the rest of the grounds? So the parking areas, the outside of the other non-greenhouse buildings.
As far as security lighting, the regulations say lighting if necessary. We believe that having infrared cameras to substitute for lighting will eliminate the need for security lighting. There will need to be some lighting as per any other responsible development for entryways and the parking area. But it will all be downward facing and as low as an intensity as is permitted.
So, and is this a 24-hour-a-day operation where there are employees other than security on the campus at all times coming in? So therefore, is there a need for lighting in the parking areas and on the exterior of the buildings for people to move around, not just for security?
Not necessarily. We weren't considering prohibiting a grower from having 1 or 2 people working at night, but typically this is done during daylight.
Would the applicant be amenable to a condition that it be done during the daytime?
It means the baker has to knock off at 4 p.m. in winter, but
Or at a certain time frame?
Yeah.
8 p.m., 9 p.m.,
Sure.
something like that?
sure. 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., something like that.
Because there's elevations around this area. I mean, I don't know the area. I'm sure we're gonna hear from folks. But if there's a gravel pit, there's gonna be... Can't hear you. I said if there's a gravel pit, there's gonna be elevations. There's gonna be residents up high, I believe. I'm not familiar with the area. I think we'll hear from people that they may be able to see this place. I don't know.
Okay. Are we done? Is the board done?
Good night.
All right.